My name is Charlotte. I'm 26 years old and single. I don't have a full-time job, and I've mostly stayed at home since middle school. I went to high school but dropped out, so I only have a middle school education. Since then, I've been living with my parents, working part-time jobs, and doing some online work. I have an older brother named Sawyer who's 3 years older than me. He's the complete opposite of me, good at sports, has lots of friends, and is very outgoing. My brother didn't want anyone to know he had a sister like me. He never brought friends home, and if I happened to run into him and his friends at a convenience store, he would ignore me. I thought it was just the way things were and didn't take it too personally. When my brother started college and moved out on his own, I stopped worrying about it. Later, there was news that my brother was getting married. He was about to turn 29, so it wasn't surprising. It was decided that he would bring his fiancée to our parents' house. Since I was home that day, I decided to join them. "Dad, Mom, I'm home," my brother said when he arrived on time. When he saw me sitting with our parents, he looked confused for a moment. "Sorry to intrude," his fiancée said as she entered the house, unaware of my brother's reaction. Then she looked at me and seemed puzzled. I could tell from her expression that she was silently asking my brother, "Who is this?" He probably hadn't told her about me. "Thank you for coming all this way. I'm Sawyer's mother, and this is his father." My mom introduced only herself and my dad. Sawyer's fiancée seemed satisfied and bowed politely, but she still looked confused. My father didn't say anything to support me. My parents have always been tough on me because I couldn't measure up to my accomplished brother. When we were younger, they'd say things like, "Your brother can do it, why can't you?" as if it was part of my education. But as we grew older, it got worse. Eventually, they even called me a money-sucking leech. It seemed like my parents planned to ignore me at this meeting too. As my mother got up to get more drinks, she whispered in my ear, "Why are you here? Go back to your room." I had attended this meeting because I wanted to connect with my family in my own way, but it seemed to have backfired. Still, I couldn't just leave, so I stayed. My brother's fiancée introduced herself as Isabella. She was the same age as me, 26, but she was a beautiful woman with a refined atmosphere, making me feel like I shouldn't talk to her casually. My brother seemed a bit annoyed, probably because he didn't like me being there. He introduced Isabella to our parents but didn't say anything to me. I felt like a ghost. After they finished discussing the marriage, the conversation turned casual, but my brother still acted like I didn't exist. Then Sawyer asked, "What do you usually do, Charlotte?" Before I could answer, my brother interrupted, "Wait, Isabella, you don't need to talk to her." He said this clearly. Isabella looked a bit surprised. "That's right, don't worry about it," my mother added. "Yeah, don't worry about it, she's just a stranger with a blood relation," my father said. At that moment, something inside me broke. They saw me as a stranger. I realized then that reconciliation was never possible. The meeting ended as if my presence didn't matter at all. Soon after, my brother and Isabella got married and started building a house together. My brother works at a well-known company, and even though he's still in his 20s, he earns a good income. Isabella decided to become a stay-at-home wife and had already quit her job. Around the time their house was finished, we received an invitation to their housewarming party. The guest list included Isabella's relatives and my brother's bosses. My mother was anxious, saying, "Oh, the house is already finished. Time flies. We need to prepare a housewarming gift. What should we get?" My father said, "We're family, so it doesn't have to be anything fancy," and casually flipped over the invitation. Only my parents' names were on it. My name wasn't there. My mother noticed this and asked, "Charlotte is coming too, right?" I wondered why she asked that, given how they had introduced me at the previous meeting. I said it was fine if I wasn't invited, but my mother insisted, "No, you're coming. I'll make arrangements." So I ended up going to the party. On the day of the party, it started raining. My parents and I took a taxi to my brother's house. My brother and Isabella didn't come out to greet us in the yard because of the rain, so they waited at the entrance. As soon as we arrived, my mother said to me, "You pay for the taxi," and got out of the car with my father first. Without umbrellas, they both hurried toward the entrance. I realized they had asked me to pay for the taxi because of the distance between our house and my brother's. After paying, I ran toward the entrance. Isabella looked at me and asked, "Who are you?" I had only met Isabella once before, so maybe she had forgotten me. I introduced myself, saying, "I'm Charlotte, Sawyer's sister." But she replied with a smile, "Oh, the high school dropout. We didn't invite the parasite living off her parents." Isabella said this casually, still smiling. My brother, who had just returned from showing someone in, came out too. He looked at me with disdain and said, "Why are you here? Hey, Sawyer, I told you not to invite her. Why is she here?" Well, I don't know either, he replied. My brother didn't want to invite me after all, and Isabella changed her attitude once she remembered who I was. In fact, she was even worse than my brother and parents. I asked my brother cautiously, would it have been better if I didn't come? Yeah, you're a stranger because you didn't even finish high school. That doesn't really count as an education, right? Could you please leave the property quickly? Isabella backed up what my brother said, as if she were on his side. Her expression stayed calm, which made it even scarier. Understood, I replied and turned to leave. The taxi we had taken earlier was gone, and since we weren't on a main street, it seemed hard to find another one. I didn't have an umbrella, so I trudged along, getting soaked in the rain. I could hear Isabella laughing behind me. After a while, I returned home. My parents came back later, looking like they had a good time. When they saw my face, they asked, "Why did you leave so suddenly? Couldn't even call a taxi for the way back? You're so useless," my mother complained, like it was no big deal. Sorry, I suddenly had a stomach ache. I lied to cover it up. For such a reason you left on your own? You're hopeless. Make sure to send the gift later. You're an adult, my father told me. I had actually prepared a gift to give at the party, but I brought it back with me without giving it. I wanted to send it by mail, but I didn't know their address. I can ask my parents, but the atmosphere was awkward, so I decided to contact my brother directly. I want to send a gift. Can you tell me the address? I asked him. His reply was short. I don't give my address to strangers. I let out a sigh. Is it really fun for him to assert dominance over me even in private, not just in front of others? I couldn't help but be amazed. Maybe it wasn't just my brother sending these messages, maybe Isabella was typing and laughing out loud too. Either way, it was ridiculous. I decided not to send a congratulatory gift for my brother and his wife's housewarming party. Instead, I decided to leave home for good. I realized I couldn't get along with my family anymore and wanted to live on my own. Even though I didn't have a full-time job, I had some savings from my part-time work, so I was able to rent a place. Since I didn't have much money, I decided to try streaming videos in my spare time. I had already been interested in watching streams as a hobby and knew how popular streamers increased their views. When I started streaming myself, I began earning tens of thousands of dollars a month. The income grew enough to cover my living expenses, so I decided to invest the extra money. The investments went well, and I even started a small company importing and selling goods. I was busy in a good way and felt fulfilled every day. I no longer had a family complaining about me being on the computer all the time. A few months later, I got a call from my parents who hadn't contacted me since I left home. They asked if I could help Sawyer, my brother, financially. I was genuinely curious and asked why. I wondered what could have happened to the person who had just built a new house. My parents slowly explained that my brother had been hosting frequent parties and interacting with various people, including bosses, executives, clients, and Isabella's acquaintances. Among them, someone proposed an investment opportunity and my brother trusted it. He ended up losing a large sum of money, tempted by the promise of big returns in just a few months. I was amazed. My brother had a decent job, so if he had just kept working hard, he wouldn't have made such a mistake. I asked if the person who recommended the investment was a scammer, but my parents insisted it wasn't. It was one of Isabella's acquaintances. I then asked how much they needed. The amount they mentioned was shocking, something a regular employee couldn't easily afford. I hesitantly asked if that was really the amount my brother needed alone, and as I feared, my parents admitted that they had also been introduced to the same investment. I told them that I couldn't easily come up with that much money and tried to hang up the phone, but they clung on, saying, "We're your real family. Help us out in times like these." I responded, "Real family? Too little, too late. Sorry, but I'm busy and remember, I'm a stranger to you, right?" With that, I'd hung up the phone. One day, my parents, brother, and pregnant sister-in-law, Isabella, unexpectedly showed up at the office of the company I run. I was in the middle of a business meeting when my secretary informed me, "There are guests here for you, President." Confused, I asked, "I don't have any other appointments. Who are they?" "They claim to be your family, ma'am," she replied. A shudder ran through me. I apologized to the business partner I was meeting with and excused myself to handle the situation. When I reached the reception area, there stood Isabella, my brother, and my parents. My brother, with a smirk, looked around the office and said, "You're running the company, huh? Well, it's much smaller than where I work." Pretending I didn't recognize them, I coldly asked, "Who are you?" My brother immediately lost his temper. "What's with the attitude?" he shouted. My mother quickly intervened, trying to smooth things over. "We talked about this before, but we need your support. You're running a company, so you can help us out, right?" She shamelessly asked for money, acting as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Yeah, it's an important time for our family, Isabella added. I'm about to give birth, but the child's growth isn't good, so we need to see a good doctor. Please, Charlotte, she pleaded, as my father nodded in agreement. They all acted as if it was my duty to bail them out, just because I was doing well. Meanwhile, employees occasionally walked by the reception area, glancing over with concern at the escalating scene. Wanting to end the disturbance quickly, I firmly said, "Please leave, you're causing a disturbance." But my brother couldn't contain his anger. "What? We're a disturbance? We came all the way here, and that's how you talk to your family?" he yelled, drawing even more attention from the employees. As the situation escalated, my brother decided to make a scene. "Do you all know this girl dropped out of middle school? She was a shut-in, a total NEET," he shouted, clearly intending to humiliate me into giving him the money he wanted. But instead of the reaction he expected, the employees responded with unexpected support. "We know. Everyone knows the president's background," one of them said confidently. "The president hires many people from similar situations. Is there a problem?" My brother, who was used to socializing with highly educated and high-income people, seemed caught off guard. He stammered, Sensing his weakness, my father tried to take control. "What pathetic company, just a gathering of NEETs," he sneered. My brother quickly regained his composure and joined in. "Exactly. Companies that do business with a place like this can't be any good either," he yelled, trying to insult my business further. Just then, the president of the company I had been meeting with emerged from the reception room, having clearly heard the shouting. My brother's face went blank and then turned pale as he recognized the man. He lowered his gaze, suddenly nervous. "What's wrong, Sawyer?" Isabella asked, confused by his sudden change in demeanor. "Idiot, don't say my name," my brother hissed at her, but it was too late. Sawyer, oh, it's you." The company president walked straight up to my brother, looking directly at him. "You're the guy who always falls short, Mr. Long, the division manager, right? We owe a lot to your company." It turned out that his company was also a client of my brother's. My brother began to sweat profusely, clearly panicking. That's... "Oh, I guess I'm not memorable since we're not a decent company," the president said, throwing my brother's own words back at him. My brother was completely frozen, unable to respond. My father, mother, and Isabella, realizing the severity of the situation, fell silent as well. I took a deep breath and turned to the president, ignoring my so-called family. "I'm sorry for taking up your valuable time. I'll ask them to leave." But the president smiled and shook his head. "Oh, are you sure? I have time today, so I don't mind waiting. You can prioritize talking with your family." "They're not my family," I said firmly, glancing coldly at my parents, brother, and sister-in-law. My words hung in the air, final and unyielding. After I told them they're complete strangers, my parents and brother's family were kicked out of the company. They seemed stunned by the meeting with the company president, but they left quietly. I was curious about how my job had been exposed, so I looked into it and discovered that Isabella was behind it. She had a friend who was good with investment information and often kept an eye on such things. This friend was a young, talented trader and business owner. When Isabella saw this woman's photo in the media, she realized that this woman was her husband's sister, who she knew was a middle school dropout and NEET. Isabella told my brother and parents about this and suggested they ask me for money. Since I was busy and didn't answer the phone or call them back, they ended up coming to my company. I had been treating them like strangers, so I decided not to get involved with them anymore. Still, I couldn't help but look into Isabella. I found out that Isabella's friend, who was also her ex-boyfriend, had been involved in my parents' and brother's financial troubles. It turned out that the child Isabella was carrying wasn't my brother's but the baby of this investor. My brother was devastated because everything had been a lie. Isabella had also been getting money from several other men with the help of her ex-boyfriend. As a result, my brother and Isabella divorced. Now, Isabella and her ex-boyfriend are in police custody. The money lost will be coming back soon. Since the incident at my company, my brother's situation got worse. In his 20s, he was moved to a less important department and eventually had to resign. He couldn't keep the job due to the financial troubles and his poor performance. My father also got into trouble. After losing his temper with a subcontractor, he was investigated and fired. It turns out he had been making derogatory comments about people with lower education levels, just like he used to say to me. Both my brother and father lost their jobs as a result. Now the former family members, whose income has dropped, keep trying to get in touch with me, asking to live together. I had them banned from entering my company's building so they can't force their way in anymore. Despite everything, they still reach out, but my response remains the same. I don't know you. You're complete strangers to me. I have no intention of changing that response in the future.